Evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I'd like to welcome you all to the Wanda Coleman Theater and to a reading and conversation for Find Me When You're Ready by Perry James, featuring Jackson Burgess and Elena Karina Byrne. Yeah, make some noise for Perry. My name is Jimmy Vega. I am the Associate Director of Beyond Baroque. I'd like to start by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent disposition of their land. As an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting Indigenous communities, their stories, and cultures. For those who don't know, Beyond Baroque is Los Angeles' oldest literary arts center, located here in Venice, California, founded in 1968 by George Drury Smith, first as an experimental literary magazine before reimagining itself and becoming the literary home we know it as today. We are based out of the original Venice City Hall and help support writers and help cultivate new writing through our extensive program of writing workshops, readings, and performances. We offer a number of workshops online via Zoom, such as our free weekly Monday night fiction workshop, facilitated by Raquel Baker, and our historic Wednesday night poetry workshop, currently facilitated by Tom Lachis. Similarly, we offer several paid in-person and online intensive workshops throughout the year, with a good slate of offerings in 2025 that we will announce very soon. But currently, we do have an open call for our Linda J. Albertano Poetry Fellowship, which is for women and non-binary emerging poets with a bent towards performing arts. The fellow will receive $1,000 in Beyond Baroque workshop credit, an opportunity to curate an event with Beyond Baroque with the program's budget, and the opportunity to facilitate the Wednesday night poetry workshop. So for more on that and for all, I welcome you to visit our website at beyondbaroque.org. And aside from our workshops, we offer over 100 readings throughout the year with a stacked bill for tomorrow. So tomorrow in the afternoon, we'll begin with a group poetry reading celebrating 10 years of Gunpowder Press. And then later we'll shift gears a bit with an opening to 26 random words arranged alphabetically with 26 unrelated images by Ansel Crute upstairs in the Mike Kelly Gallery. And later that evening, we'll end the night with a few films and a conversation for our program, Phantom Histories, Trans-Border Poetics in Video Art, featuring various short films by Chicanx, Mexican multidisciplinary artists such as Harry Gamboa Jr., Rita Gonzalez, and Raul Baltazar, to name a few. And all of this is only accomplished with your support and with our community of members. So if you are a Beyond Baroque member, I thank you for being a member. And if you're not already, we'd love for you to become one tonight. Do visit the bookstore to inquire. Tonight, our perks for membership are The Writing Life, which we published here, Beyond Baroque's book original in 2023. It goes over our history, writing workshops, memories of Beyond Baroque, or Peter J. Harris's Song Again, which was the last book that Beyond Baroque published in their single author series, and also the last book that Peter himself published before his passing a year ago. So if you become a member, you get one of them at the $75 level. And our memberships also give you a discount in the bookstore for used books and on our intensive workshops as well. Big thanks to all of our crew: Quentin Ring, Yvonne Salinas, Eric Alberg in the booth, Genesis Perez, Nick Foreman, Rhiannon Cielo Chavez. They keep the space running, so please give them some love and clap for them, please. And so what we'll do first is we're going to welcome our first reader. We'll have a little poetry, and then we'll switch over after Perry for a conversation with Elena Karina Byrne. But first up, we have Jackson Burgess, a poet, novelist, and essayist based in Los Angeles, author of Atrophy and Pocket Full of Glass. He's the recipient of fellowships from the University of Southern California and the Iowa Writers Workshop, where he was the first ever dual admit to the fiction and poetry programs. Jackson has placed poems and stories in the Los Angeles Review, the Cincinnati Review, Pank, Rattle, Fugue, Willow Springs, Tin House, and elsewhere. Please welcome Jackson Burgess.
Hey, friends. I just found out that Jimmy's debut poetry collection is coming out. So ask him about it afterwards. All right. I'm going to read a few poems from Atrophy. Here is something that is true. At some point in broad nightlight, you'll shave your pubes before going to a party, and you'll end up ladling in a soup kitchen instead. One time on Western and Expo, a guy hyped on PCP charged a cop car naked, like maybe if he smashed the dash hard enough, he'd break the windshield and not his hands. But he was wrong, and we watched him hit the pavement and sob. He was Tank Man in South Central, but the cops didn't care. And neither did we, really, since we just blinked and walked away. Another time I stopped outside a sorority house because a girl was at her window. It was dark. She was applying makeup violently, which I hadn't thought possible. And I don't think she saw me, but I waved just in case. My friend Shane told me that smoking helps you hike at high altitudes because your body learns to deal with less oxygen. So maybe if I lock myself in a hot box closet, I'll figure out how to navigate my sex life without smothering in the sheets. Here's a weird one. I punch myself when I'm anxious and nobody's looking, just to take my mind someplace else. And I must confess, it works. Lost my spot. I don't know what the deal is with all these hollowed out phone booths, but they give me the creeps, and it's not like I have anything new to say about God or sex, but I'm still talking. I've learned that if you want to be left alone in public, you just have to curse in creative ways like, fuck shit, fuck, and wear moth-eaten clothes. But if you end up in the wrong neighborhood, lonely strangers will stick to you like glaze, like last Friday, when a bald gangbanger gave me girl advice for a good 20 minutes at MacArthur Park. Most of it was him complaining about his ex and his hair loss, but the dude meant well. So I wish I knew what to say about gin stagger and needles, or how to forget the press of open lips, but I don't. My sermon is Zippo tricks and love notes on napkins. My friends are my bruises, and I know I taste like nicotine, but everybody tastes like something. There was one time on Western and Expo when a man got really scared. And rather than let anyone notice, he shattered his fists against a checkered dash. Later, I saw a girl assault her own face for some defect only she could see. And then along the lake known for body bags and ducks, I shared a cig with a guy about as lonely as me. Here's the truth. At some point, everything ends, and the streetlights turn off, usually because it's bright enough to see. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beyond Baroque and Jimmy and Yvonne. I know you're not here, but you're somewhere out there watching. And thank you. Thank you, Perry and Elena, for having me along for the ride. I am anxious as hell to be doing this. I don't know if y'all could tell, but by the way, for the record, I just hit 2 years off nicotine entirely, and I'm coming up on 5 years off booze. But these are old poems, and I'm talking a lot about addiction stuff. So I'm sorry, but. Readings used to be a lot easier when I could just get like blackout drunk, but I'm here, I'm present, I'm with you. We're gonna get through this together. This is called Elegy. We were the ones slow dancing with street lamps, fashioning gallows out of bottle and bone. We were singing from the tops of pines. The birds didn't know what to make of us and our scramble toward the sky. We were building walls in the backyard and knocking them down the next morning. On the metro, we were always swimming in pools of our own sweat. On midnight treks for smokes, we caught rain on our tongues and carried it back home. We were cages of light barreling into the gutter, the only place we fit. Our mating calls resembled quarters in a blender. Our path was marked by the string of baffled dog catchers and gas station receipts. The candy in the freezer was not candy. The burns down our arms were not from the stove. The 40s in the recycling were stained with lipstick and piss. We were pipes bare save for resin. We were busted chainsaws, fences full of holes. We were the mad ones, our pockets full of rattlesnakes, our mouths full of cement. Our pals were the garbage men and ghosts. We were the halos around headlights when the sky cried mist. We were white knuckling on the freeway while earthquakes shook the streets. We were twilight cathedrals crumbling and cold. We were weeping on the pavement when the blackout let us go. It's always funny at a poetry reading to see if it's like a snap crowd or a clap crowd or like a crowd, like a, I love whatever it is. It always feels better than that dead silence at a shitty one. All right. I'm trying to read a lot of LA poems because I don't know, the fire's got me thinking a lot about us as a city and an identity and, you know, solidarity. And so it's been nice, a nice excuse to revisit some old LA stuff. Speaking of cigarettes, this is called American Spirits, but it's a double entendre. And the worst part was she'd only had a bottle and a half, which isn't much for her. And I shredded my soles running just to find her slumped on the porch with a pack of American Spirits on hand. She cried out all the alcohol and told me about her mother, how to mix a French 75. I pitched a dozen Valium across the lawn to make the cats feel a little less empty, a little less like spiders stuck in Coke bottles. We ordered gin and tonics at Denny's and snorted orange juice onto the rug. I know another girl who is sad all the time, who smokes weed and used to slip her hand into mine on walks through golden hour haze. When I left her, she talked about barbiturates like old friends and gave me a fistful of well-conditioned hair. She once said, "I'll kill you, I'll fucking kill you, I love you so much," in plumes of pillow and breeze. Now it's the three of us on our own, balking at prescription pads and chain-smoking outside parties, spitting in gutters to keep the current strong. It's winter in Los Angeles, and the trees keep tearing up the sidewalks. People notice when you've been crying, but they rarely mention it. And hordes of feral cats flood roadways saying, "Hit me, don't hit me, please hit me, do it now." There are times when the world feels like a wound no amount of pressure can seal. We are disillusioned manifold, mounds of flaming tires, and our friends worry sometimes because we haven't been smiling or answering their calls. And they're right, something is wrong, but we'll be the first to admit. It's 1 a.m. Tonight I'm alone in the Culver City Denny's, wiping orange juice out of the carpet and setting every other smoke aside. I am not holy. I hold my vices like a crutch. I'm still stuffing my backpack with pipe bombs, still helping loved ones look for graves. Thank you. Back in grad school, I got to cosplay as a professor, and I got to teach classes of undergrads, and I loved it. It was so fun. I loved my kids. I work with high school kids now, but it was just fun in a different way, but it's not the same. But something you said like 10 minutes ago, Elena, reminded me of this. This is called call and response. When I tell my class to write a poem about nothing, I hope someone will turn in a blank page. But instead, I get descriptions of empty beds, open mouths, the quiet between bird call and response. I draw a hole on the blackboard, give my tired spiel about its ontology, the hole's reliance on dirt. Noon arrives. We all go home. My therapist tells me my face looks normal today. I say nothing's wrong. 2 colonies of ants wage war over the crack beside my dumpster for 3 days before the rain sweeps them away. I dream of my ex-lover on another man's arm, and there's nothing I can give her, so I say nothing. Nothing pushes her away. A pink moon sings over cemetery crickets, and no one hears her, so she slinks back into the fog. Diesel runs in rainbows at the largest truck stop in the country, craving water it can repulse. I tell strangers in bars there's nothing sexy about desperate bravado, and I chomp ice cubes to prove my point. They laugh, leave. We all go home. At the end of everything, I am a vestige making music out of nothing, and I know I look like an exit wound from where you stand now, but even silence makes a sort of sound. I worship nothing. I gather it into my lungs. My fingers flee my hands. My heart is a photocopied fist, photocopied laughter. Somebody got on my ass back in grad school about that last line. They're like, you can't photocopy laughter because and I got so annoyed. And then the rest of the class was like, yeah, that's a good point. And so I just had, but in a workshop, you just have to sit in silence and take notes as everybody just shits on you. So I had to just take it. And now I'll never forget it. Yeah, be nice in workshops if you're ever in workshops because, man, that'll fuck you up. July heat has got me weeping at the bus stop again, clutching old letters and crossing out words until it's all nonsense. I, gentle, sex, cold, now, unbearable, heel, hair. Sitting here on Sunset, feeling my lungs light up and fry, I toss away my filter, lick my lips in the sun. I keep thinking about the night I fell down the courtyard stairs, how the wine between my teeth probably looked like blood, how the partiers just kept partying. I found some bananas in the pantry and laid the peels out where people were dancing, but nobody slipped. A couple nights later, I tried to make love to a woman, but I kept laugh crying, so I zipped up her pants and went home. It wasn't fair, and I have yet to call it explain what happened. How I wandered up 30th, past chalk-stained fences with my hands splayed out like wings. It's all fucked. This city and these lights and this noise. It's all a bunch of pseudo-intellectuals and kids huffing paint. The freeways are choked with wrecked frames of metal and bone, and the drivers just keep driving. On the bus, I sit and watch a boy braid his sister's hair. He's got his eyes screwed up, his lips parsed and tense. The boy looks at me and grins. His sister says, "Don't stop," and our bus rocks along to a backdrop of exhaust punching holes in the air we all breathe. I'm noticing as I read these bad boys, I tend to, or at least back then, I used to end poems back where I began. But I've always been obsessed with spirals and repeating, all that. If you'll permit me, I would like to read 2 new poems, hot off the press. And I don't think anybody's heard these ones yet. This is called Inheritance. When I lift my father's saw, my fingers meet metal, much like the Missoula man's fist met my face, flouring the cartilage. I asked him to hit me. Don't say belligerence, say loneliness. One night when I told my father the story from the passenger seat, he shared another like it from his youthful drinking days. He and I had left a party early to beat what the news had dubbed a generational storm. But when we reached the mountain pass, felled oaks had blocked the road. Good neighbors were waving chainsaws in the rain. We parked behind the clock tower as branches battered the doors. Now, decades sober, my father said, "I was never good at fighting, but I was very good at drinking." Don't say habit, say inheritance. Pema says, abandon hope, as if accepting the blows might dull their force. Her mentor was very good at drinking and hiding fists in flowers. There is a lot you don't understand. When I learned my mentors had kept a black book of bettable names, I felt sick, wondering how my phone was any different. In an Iowa city now long gone, I begged the nurse at Mercy to feed me Valium, then demanded it. Don't say desperate, say dependent. Say, I was very good at drinking. Say, even in sobriety, I have fallen near the tree. Say a tree falls in a generational storm. Whose duty is it to clear? Who's leaving the party early? Who's afraid to abandon hope? There is a lot I don't understand. Pema says enlightenment is the ultimate loneliness. My father taught me tenderness. I am going to the mountain with a poncho and a saw. Thanks. I'm going to close with one poem. I wrote this poem right before I met my girlfriend, who's here. I was feeling real hopeless and down. It's called Lord, Let Me Love Again, which is probably going to change. It's a little melodramatic, I know. But thank you guys. Y'all have been great. And Jimmy, I'm trying to stick to 15 minutes. I know poets tend to go like 45, 50. Not me. I don't like being up here, so thank you guys. Listen, I have wandered these alleys limping like a car-hit dog for far too long. And I remember smoking outside the hospital while Kay sat 5150'd inside. And Lord, the loneliness shreds like steel wool to the heart. And all our camaraderie counted little as Los Angeles swallowed us up like a fistful of mystery pills. And what does it mean when the crows coat the tree line like pitch? And how can one love starlight without first drowning in dark? And Lord, I remember sobbing in the bistro the day Daniel Johnston died. And now that the music is muted and we're all looking around forlornly, hoping to be held, Lord, let me never stop searching. Thank you, guys.
Jackson Burgess, folks, give it up. Continue to show some love. Thank you, Jackson. That was really great, and great to always hear LA poems and to gather here as we are kind of in the aftermath of the fires and all that is around us. So thank you. Up next, Perry Janes is a poet and filmmaker from Metro Detroit, Michigan, a recipient of the Pushcart Prize. His work has appeared in Poetry, Poem a Day, Electric Literature, the Audroit Journal, Ziziva, and many others. He holds a BA from the University of Michigan, where he was a 5-time recipient of the Hollywood Award, and an MFA in Poetry from Warren Wilson College. A winner of the American Academy of Motion Pictures of Arts and Sciences Student Academy Award. He lives in Los Angeles, where he is at work on an original film and TV material for A24, Amazon Studios, Film Nation, and others. Please welcome Perry Janes.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Let me put this timer here to make sure that I don't run long. Thank you for being here. It's a Friday night in Los Angeles. Poetry has a lot of competition. So for everyone who has driven their ass over here to Venice, whether you are local or coming from far, thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you to Jimmy, to Yvonne, to Beyond Baroque for having us. One thing I'm learning on book tour is that you start to get sick of your own poems. So I've decided to switch up my usual program here tonight, and we are all going to see how that goes. I'm going to start with 2 poems I don't normally read, but I have found myself reflecting on the moment, I guess, that we're in, including the fires locally, but also the overwhelm politically, globally. And so, yeah, we're going to start on a high note, I guess. We're going to start with 2 poems that are loosely, I guess, interpolations and responses to that moment. So this is called Love Poem as Trojan Horse. The forest fires above Los Angeles have crept down the hills overnight, where this morning their scorched sunrise rouges my fiddlehead fern. Sometimes hope is a question of redirecting the camera. A friend tells me he has to trick himself into feeling anything but numb for the world. What won't burn? Not the patchwork quilt Tina bought for our engagement, not the brewery growlers stacked along our wine crate bookshelves, teacups glazed with our fingerprints, the fake stars glued to our ceiling in constellations forever spelling fortune, not the anything we truly cherish. I used to prize clarity without compromise. I used to want suffering center stage, well lit in the lens. Now it's changed. So many routes in the heart city steadily walled. So much need for a gentle hand pulling focus from one fire to another. The tug that leads me from my window out into the night, our night, a blanket tossed around our shoulders, full bellies swaying, her body stamped on mine as we stumble to the gates. If it must be ruin, if it must come to ruin, love, open me. Okay, this next poem, if I can locate it in here, I tend not to read this poem. I'm going to be completely transparent with y'all. It's the longest poem in the book, so I'm going to take you on a journey with me right now. Stay with me. In addition to reflecting, I think, on some of the stuff that I referenced earlier, I do have to say that this poem goes out to anyone who loves nature and holds no delusions about their ability to rough it. Survival Guide for Great Indoorsmen. In San Bernardino State Park, 6,000 feet above sea level, a place so remote no one would notice for weeks if I went casually, almost easily missing. I hitch a stoic smile to my face and hike the winter trail 10 paces out front. My friends, warm in their fleece-lined vests and laughter, allowing me to lead. When I see, in the snow, nearly the same size as my overlarge Timberland boots, a paw print. And because I'm not an alarmist, because I don't want to scream the word bear, because I can't bear to hear my own voice stripped high in the altitude, I shout, "Guys, I think I found something." In California, any hike is rife with risk of wildlife encounters. Mountain lion, brown bear, rattlesnake. Swimming is no better. To swim in the ocean is to re-enter the food chain. Tiger shark, great white shark, Portuguese man-o-war, hammerhead shark, jellyfish, fishing trawlers, whose nets, broken from their pulleys, float like invisible snares to hook unsuspecting paddlers. Oil spills. You get the gist. I once heard a teacher refer to himself as a great indoorsman, and have considered getting the words tattooed on my bicep ever since. It's fortunate. For those like us, there are guides full of practical instructions for survival. In case of a mountain lion, get big. In case of a rattlesnake, stand still. In case of a bear, play dead. Unless the bear is startled, mating with cubs, unless the snake initiates the dance, unless the lion has decided at that particular hour, nothing is larger than hunger. I'm not saying my fear makes sense. I'm saying the bear you don't see is more terrifying than the bear you do. Or not, a bear like Niagara Falls lives up to its reputation for awe. Sometimes two truths coexist. Truth. I watched the movie Grizzly Man in high school and dreamt for weeks afterward in the same key of two documentarians being eaten alive. Truth. It's peaceful in the mountains. I escape there as often as I can. In Los Angeles, solitude requires commitment. I cultivate my own ecosystem. I've learned to avoid my neighbors, the peering eyes of baristas, friendly though they may be. I remain confined to my apartment, my car, my littlest village of screens. Even here, what's wild presses in. In case of username Snowflake Killer 1980 cursing you by name in the comments section of some C-SPAN news clip posted to social media, block them. In case of a truck on the highway honking behind you, high beams flashing with ire, slow to let them pass. In case of a man at your door hawking flyers that gleefully proclaim the end of days, his fist banging, actually banging the screen for you to open already, accept the bitter sacrament of reality, carefully latch the deadlock. Leave his howl to the roadside, some poor sedan perpetually stuck and idle. Unless the man decides right then to strike down all non-believers, unless the truck nudges your bumper, unless the fascist in the comments section doxes your address, sourced from public domain registries, to an e-blast of trolls, unless you no longer know where the threat is coming from. Spindrift cycle of menace, confusion of jeopardy. In San Bernardino State Park, the trees are all half burned. A memory of fire. Lamp black bark charred limbless, root to trunk, until green buds, bird nests, bear paw. Look how I call the imagined creature to my palm, how it shivers with pleasure, the way animals sometimes do, and walks beside me down the wintry trail, leaving only our single set of tracks behind. Thanks, y'all. I've been talking a lot, so we're gonna hope that my voice doesn't break in the middle of one of these poems. So I'm gonna interrupt myself with water. And we are now going to transition from one form of disaster to another. To the social media influencer in line ahead of me at Starbucks. I wasn't watching when you pulled the phone from your pocket, fired up the camera, held it overhead to proclaim, "Yo, I'm here at Starbucks on Melrose with these fly-ass Angelinos." So maybe that's on me. But the fact is, I was caught by surprise when you turned the lens behind you, smile, motherfucker, and I mooned, dumb as a cow in its stall for the screen. I moved to Los Angeles for familiar reasons. The truth is, I was once an accomplished child actor performing well-adjusted cheer for my parents. I remember calling my house a black box theater, as only an only child with an active imagination might call it. It is difficult to describe now, this feeling of always being watched. Protective, sure, but also, I don't know, expectant. The way one watches a pot of water before it boils, a morning glory half wilted on its stem the moment the sun peeks up and you hope for the damned thing to open. I haven't spoken to my family in weeks. Spoken, I mean, in the manner of families on television, all breezy dialogue. And so I label every customer in the cafe mother and father. I imagine each corner table carefully set with placemats, each latte, a casserole we lean over and spoon one another platefuls of dinner. All of it bluntly wholesome. The mothers and fathers not yet training their cyclopean eye on the child they fear they've failed. The violent action now, all backstory. Each new detail, rife with danger, the child, now and always, held in their sight, even at a distance, even through the camera of a customer in some California Starbucks, staring with barely concealed interest as the internet celebrity, having made the rounds, returns to try me once more. How about that smile? And see how easy it can be to be the morning glory just for a second. To imagine your family somewhere, flipping channels in the ether, finding you there on the screen, wondering if you will do what they have always hoped, if you are going to wave, if you are going to smile and cry and thank them for watching. Yeah, you're right. The claps are better than silence. That's true. That's true. All right, let me see where I am on time here. This music. As a child, I had a tendency toward the chronic. Ear infections, outbursts, nightmares. Through 5 long years, I carouseled in and out of exam rooms, schoolyards. Through 2 more, I curled at the foot of my wire-frame bed, closest to the open door and its offering of light. When my mother or father happened past to find me there, late or not so late, they would stop to sing me lullabies, wordless ditties I now know they must have forgotten the lyrics for. Eventually, I'd fall asleep, and when I woke hours later to find blood on my pillow, urine-wet sheets, the ritual recommenced. I never wondered what these intrusions meant for their own sleepless nights. If they whistled the same melody through 12-hour days and graveyard shifts, into grocery bags knotted with discount produce or phones left off the cradle to reject angry collectors, they ever tired of it. Each evening ending with their hands cupped at my ears, where they hummed their off-key tune to soothe me back to sleep. Years later, in high school, the gaunt-faced teacher, already eyeing college admissions, assigned us to write about a period of suffering or struggle in our lives. When I stood at the front of the class to recite what I'd written, even my teacher betrayed his surprise and something like satisfaction by my little efforts at lyric. Finally, I thought, some use for it all, and rushed home to perform for my parents, pleased at this music I believed I had made. All right. In keeping with being tired of one's own poems, I too am going to read 2 new pieces here, just for fun. And so I am working on I'm actually working on a couple of things, but I'm working on a new book, which is heavily informed by, inspired by, traumatized by, inflected by working in Hollywood. And so this first piece is a short one. It's called Building the Set. Like my father at his draftsman's desk, or my grandfather with his bricks, it was a worker's hands who built the sets I love. The shanty town by Mesa Rocks, the spacecraft sealed with duct tape. Patiently, they assembled each temporary world where the jerry-rig of their devotion held the scene together. And when the movie later wrapped, they tore it down to struts. Though they toiled out of frame, what mattered was their craft. If I could see them now, bent to each joist lovingly laid, lovingly destroyed, I would know what they know of dreams and labor. Okay, and this last poem, thank you. This last poem, this was an unexpected development. I've had the good fortune to officiate the weddings of many, if not most, of my closest friends in the last 5 years. And for anyone who has officiated a wedding, you may know that there comes a point in the program where you are asked to offer advice to the couple, which is a terrifyingly intimidating thing to do in front of someone's loved ones and not knowing, necessarily someone's intimate inner workings with their partner. And so I started writing poems for these programs, and it has now become a series, which I think will appear in the book, in part because all of my friends, it seems, work in Hollywood, so they all kind of fit the theme. This is called Advice for the Couple, Needing Several Takes to Reach the Point. Much like David Fincher, famous for torturing his film sets with shot after shot after shot, who may be a strange name to invoke here on this reverent occasion of love, known as he is for such romantic films as Fight Club, Zodiac, and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. When in truth, there isn't anything to be learned about commitment that a good serial killer movie can't teach us. That dedication to rigor, the importance of close attention. I've strayed from the point. Let's take it again. I'm here to talk about love, the kind that lets the cameras roll and roll and roll, that devotes itself to the labor of craft. After nearly drowning his cast in 150,000 gallons of overchlorinated water on the set of The Abyss, James Cameron famously said, "I shed not one tear for them." I wish for you a love with as much confidence as James Cameron saying, "I shed not one tear for them." As much foresight as Park Chan-wook bringing extra canisters of film to each shoot. I've done it again. Let's reset. I'm trying to say what the best directors claim to know. There are so many ways of getting it wrong, and each is a kind of gift. No 2 takes are the same. Love, I think, is like this. Repetition, revision, one more time, from the top. I'm talking about process. The love that doesn't care how many takes it takes to find the right look at the right time in the right light, as if such a thing was possible. As if it weren't the hours on set that count, the countless tries sending you back to the start, even after the crew has gone home. Just the 2 of you now, reading lines in the dark, the only audience that matters. Thank you.
Perry Janes, folks, come on, give it up, give it up. Thank you, Perry. So now that we've, have had a little bit of Los Angeles poetry, we're going to switch over for a conversation with both Jackson and Perry. And before we do, I want to read our moderator's very brief bio. Elena Karina Byrne, author of 5 poetry collections, is a screenwriter, essayist, reviewer, multimedia artist, and editor. Elena works as a freelance lecturer and national arts programs curator with extensive work as the programming consultant and poetry stage manager for the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books and literary programs director for the historic Ruskin Art Club. Her latest collection of poetry is titled If This Makes You Nervous. Please welcome them all to the stage. We're going to shift things a little bit for them, but then we'll get into a nice conversation. Thanks, folks.
Hello. Hello. Hey. Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm so purple. Like holding it. You should have said that. It's gonna have to it. Just have one.
I'm going to repeat, thank you for coming tonight on a strange hour and era that we're in. I'm really excited to be here, and there's so many things that kind of ring true in terms of the things that matter to us. And I had some questions prepared, but I'm also thinking about the fact that not just poetry, but all writing is about identity. And I got a late life MFA during COVID. And one of the things I realized was that poetry and film share something very particular, which is that no matter what you're talking about in your poem or whatever is happening in a film, all of these things collectively, whether it's action or the way someone speaks or the choices that they make, have something to do with identity. And so one of the things I loved about beginning screenwriting was that they said, you know how your character speaks and the choices they make tell you a lot about that person. And inevitably, if you think about it, it tells you a lot about the backstory that often you don't find out about until, later in the film. And I find that in terms of my own work, and I hear it in your work, that, the discoveries that we make about ourselves and about our lives. And, it sounds like it's solipsistic or selfish, but it's not. I mean, I think that it's a great problem-solving adventure. It's like who we are, why we are, what we are, all of those things. So if you want to start there, let's start with that, and then I'll ask you, also more specifically about your relationship. If you see a relationship between your work and cinema and film.
So is the question how I bring my identity to the page, how I puzzle through that on the page?
Yeah, and just how you see, in particular, essay writing, screenwriting, how you see those genres interrelated in terms of, some reflection of an identity, and an identity that is always evolving, always changing, and how you feel that sort of becomes central to your work, I think, is my question.
I can go first.
Go for it.
I think for a very long time I viewed creative writing and verse and prose, but especially poetry, as a tool for empathy. And I think in a kind of cynical way, it can be a way to elicit empathy from an audience or a reader, like getting people to understand your lived experience. And I wrote a lot more like that when I was younger. But in revisiting the old poems, I think now, in relation to your question, I'm thinking about poetry these days much more of like a tool to empathize with oneself, or it's like I don't even know if there's a word for that. It's like a soul searching. Like if you're writing a good poem, you don't know where it ends until you get to the end, and you're like, oh shit, that's where I was going. Like you discover something as you go through, and I feel like that's a process of excavating one's emotions and empathizing with one's own interiority that you might not be able to put a name to. But I feel like a hallmark of bad cinema and bad poetry is when it doesn't take a character or a figure's identity into question. It's like if they just slap on an identity point and then they don't meaningfully engage with it and what that means to the character or to the work or to the world or the way in which they move through the world, that rings false to me. Versus the opposite. It's like a richly realized tapestry of one's identity, and it informs everything, like the words they use and so yeah, I have a lot to say about that. It's an awesome question.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to use this quote. Perry's heard me say this. I'm sure some of you may have heard me say this before, but there's this wonderful, in Emily Dickinson's letters, she wrote, I think to her sister, she said, genius is the ignition of affection, not intellect. And I thought about that, and I thought about how, and especially now, we seem to be I'm very aware of the fact that there's, and intelligence is not the right word, but if you think about it, how we perceive, it's about, perception, and so is writing. It's about like the vantage point, and if you're not including others, and that's what we're taught as writers, right? If you're not including the others as part of the self, there's you might as, it's like walking across a bridge that suddenly ends in the middle.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's absolutely true. The meaning-making process of any piece of art is an interrelation between the writer or the artist and the audience. Thinking about your question, I guess to start with the question of how maybe I see my identity reflected or interpolated in my work, I would probably start by saying that the fact that I work in 3 different genres reflects how restless I am to begin with. If there's a runner or a theme that I think shows up in a lot of my work, it probably, here I am in my defiant Detroit Lions gear 2 weeks after they get kicked out of the playoffs. But it would probably be, growing up in a working class family that then rose to middle class family, right? And I think that those communities are a heavy influence on everything that I write. And what's great about working for the screen and then working in fiction and then working in poetry is that those 3 genres give me completely different ways to sort of
fracture and explore that experience. And one thing that I have found over time is, screenwriting and fiction is a heavily narrative form of work, right? And actually, you were one of the people that pulled me aside when we first met, and you say, you write stories, your poems are not narrative. Like, how did that happen? And it's true, I had never really reflected on that, but I think that my poems do tend to be profoundly lyric, right? They tend to be meditative. They're not necessarily correlating to a specific narrative instance, time, space, right? But I think that that's an expression of what poetry can offer us that maybe fiction and screenwriting resists, right? That opportunity to really explore and embody pure thought, right? To simulate emotion and simulate thought in the formal tools of the poem for the reader. It has this toolbox to it that I don't think that discursive language typically has, right? And so that, I think, is what keeps me coming back to poetry.
Fracture is such a sick word for that process you just described. That's such a cool way to put it.
Thanks.
Well, and if you think about it, because all of these formats rely on some element of memory, and I know scientists have said that they're about consciousness, that there's no consciousness without language, but I still want to push against that. And I think about, because I was a preschool teacher for many years, and I think about how children, in my own child self, remember, and you think about it, when you think of a memory, what do you think of? The first thing you see something, you see an image in the past, you have a moment that you're captured. It's like a scene in a film, or it's like a poem. I think of poems as being like scenes, but you see the memory first before you then attribute the language to it. So there's something about that, and there's something about also just generally our acknowledgement of how we perceive, how we navigate the world. And I think that as poets, we're really lucky because we get to navigate sort of with all our senses. But as you said, the lyric form too has a way of acknowledging that part of our brains and our part of ourselves that is not tethered necessarily to a time frame or and I don't know. So, I would ask you about time. I'm going to jump then to time frames now that I'm saying this.
Well, I do have a quick thought about what you just said, if that's okay.
Please. Yeah, please.
I was reading a lot of David Lynch quotes recently for obvious reasons, rest in peace. And one of the things that he said that struck me was, he said, I don't like to remember things as they happen. I like to remember things as I remember them, which was very Lynchian. And I really enjoyed because, like bundling theory, like I subscribe to the idea that when you remember something, you don't remember that thing. It's not like it exists out there somewhere in the netherworld. You're remembering the last time you remembered that thing. And so every subsequent remembering is an act of like photocopying something into oblivion. Like you lose things. Yeah, exactly. You and sometimes you like add in little details, or you conflate memories, or something. I used to like steal other people's memories on accident and think they were mine, or dreams work their way into. But I think a poem can be a really fascinating signpost of it's like a snapshot. I like it as a scene because it's like a self-contained individual thing. It's like, this is how I remembered that series of things, whether it's lyric or narrative. It's like, this was how I felt about that in the moment of writing, and then you can come back to it in future times, and it's like a chapter mark in the bundle of rememberings.
Yeah, and there's that idea that you're locating your emotion. So there's the literal geography, there's the emotional geography, there's all that stuff going on, and I think about all writing as being kind of time travel. I said devices for travel. So, you think about flashbacks and memories, tracking movement, premonitions, trigger warnings, subjective time, and momentum. So a lot of that has to do too. You have different momentums, different ways of pacing your poems, and I'm fascinated with that. And so that goes back also to me thinking about And forgive me for I keep referencing film, but it's my new obsession. And but I'm thinking about how I'm thinking about challenging ourselves, like at least for me, challenging myself with each book. And one of the things I realized is that, okay, there's only so many subject matters. So how do we enter the same subject matters over and over and over? Love, addiction, family, all that stuff. And I thought, I'm really fascinated with how people approach the subject matter and how you start a poem, because that's the thing that grabs us, right? Is those first few lines. And I mean, this is cheesy, but I thought of those 007 films, like when they open, you're already in medias res, you're already in the middle of something, in some wild action, and so we're immediately forced to be involved. And I feel that about great poems, and both of your poems do that. It's like I'm immediately there in your world. And do you think about how you enter a subject matter?
Yeah, I find that the beginning of the poem that I start out with when I'm drafting very seldom remains the beginning of the poem. There's a certain element, I had a teacher once call it throat clearing, which
I was going to say that, dude. You just stole my whole thing.
Is what it feels like. It is what it feels like.
Sorry, Harry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. You took the last one first.
So smart sounding. Yeah, exactly.
But it's true. It's sort of like you kind of have to write your way out of your own way, at least for me, in order to get to the beginning of the poem. I believe in titles. I very often don't have a title when I start the poem, but once I reach a draft that feels like it's beginning to find its form, beginning to find its interest and its intention, I'm keenly aware of the fact that the title is actually the first line of the poem. That is someone's entry into the piece. And so actually what you just said about love poems and about revisiting subjects, but also forms, right? There's a whole series of odes in this book, right? Praise poems, which are their sort of own form of love poem. And they all started off with a very sort of straightforward title, Ode to Griffith Park, right? And what I realized is that title was actually flattening the entry into the poem. And so I wanted to try and create friction, tension in the title before people even enter it, right? And so the title became Ode to Griffith Park, or Every Tourist Attraction Gives Me a Reason for Mistrust, right? And so there's a whole series of titles like that in the book that are essentially two titles sort of smashed together, right? The either or. And I found that by sort of locating the poem, finding the poem first, right? But then really honing in on that title and how it flows into that first line, that becomes sort of, generally speaking, almost the last step in revision for me, but also one of the most important.
Wow. What about you? Because you had so many also beginning lines that were surprising but immediate hooks. It's like, oh God, I gotta know what's gonna happen next.
Yeah.
Right?
The throat clearing is real. Like every poem I've ever written, I've probably cut the first 4 to 7 lines because it's like it takes a moment to get going. But so I work in college consulting. So I mentioned I work with high school kids. And one of the things that I used to do was I would help them brainstorm and edit their personal statements for college applications, which was sometimes really easy and chill and fun. If the worst thing that ever happened to the kid was they got a B in chemistry, that's chill. But then sometimes you hear some really gnarly ones, like kids with abuse and addiction stuff. And our whole thing was trying to prioritize vulnerability. And so sometimes they really go there. But in the service of starting things in medias res, I came up with a system I called the idea system that everybody can totally steal. I think there's 4 ways to jump into something immediately. You can start with an image. You can start with a line of dialogue. You can start with an emotion, or you can start with an action. And most of the time, I'm like, if you don't start with one of those 4 things, then I'm not going to feel that propulsive energy. And then I'm like, I'm going to die someday. Life's short. I don't have time to read poems that are, you know what I mean? I want to be in. I want to get in and out. So yeah, idea is the way that I think about it now.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. I might steal that. I'll go back and listen, because a lot of my clients, I'll say to them, a lot of them are, new at writing, but also, knowledgeable enough to know, they're writing good stuff. But I find that a lot of us will warm up the subject matter, like we're introducing what we're about to talk about, and I say, well, it really gets started, a couple stanzas later, and I think that has to do with trusting ourselves, and which goes back to identity. We don't trust our identity, but which is why we're so compelled to also fall into other people's identities, why we gravitate, I think. I mean, I'm assuming, toward groups and religions, and we all wear the same clothes, and we start, and especially language, we start to adopt each other's language. It's thinking about, I love those word origins that tell you that, hundreds of years ago, the word meant something absolutely opposite of what it means now. Mm-hmm. And, but that again, this goes back to that idea of almost like a physiological process that we have to adopt to keep you're about to say something.
If you don't mind,
I want you to jump in.
I like what you were saying about what draws us to groups and the way that we adopt language, and I think that it's, in some respect, it's an attraction to familiarity, which is safety, right? Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that keeps me coming back to poetry. It sounds grandiose to say, but it's one of the great powers that I think that poetry has, which is the ability to defamiliarize the familiar, right? Because poetry is often not working in narrative or discursive language even necessarily, because it is embracing mystery or ambiguity without the expectation or need to provide answers, because it is giving us a different way to engage with language. It is very often, I think, taking something that feels familiar. It could be a turn of phrase, it could be an image, a line of dialogue, any of those things, right? And it has the opportunity to defamiliarize that and make it new again, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that in a moment where not only is the familiar comfortable, but also the horrible is familiar, right? I think that defamiliarization is such a potent tool of the poem.
Defamiliarizing the familiar. I love talking to poets. I'm picking up so many cool little tidbits, but I've never thought about defamiliarizing the familiar as a sort of defense mechanism. But I feel like right now, especially both locally and nationally, and I guess internationally, it feels I find myself turning to escapist art more, like narrative games and novels and like sometimes familiar TV shows, which I think is just a means of self-preservation, because it's like, at least in this little world, there's some control, and what's going to come next, and you're not going to get blindsided by another crazy-ass executive order or something. But I love thinking about poetry as a means of defamiliarizing the familiar. It's like there's only so many words that we can use, and everybody's heard most of them anyway. And a bad poem uses words that nobody understands, so it's like it kind of has to be like a funhouse mirror. You got to tell it slant.
Well, I know I've said this before too, but Stanley Kunitz, who was one of our poet laureates and lived to be 101, I believe. I interviewed him in college, and he said, words are so erotic. They never tire of their coupling.
That's cool.
Which is true, but that element of surprise, I think because we tend to move along in groups, to just kind of wake yourself up a bit, and for that I'm grateful. I'm the oldest one here, I'm sure, in the room, but it's never too late to change. It's never too late to start something new. It's never too late to learn something, right? And I feel like, I'm going back to both of your works. I feel like you enter these worlds. I want to visit worlds, and if I can't do it literally, I want to do it on the page. And I love like being part of, or at least being privy or being a voyeur of what you guys are doing. So, but there's something also so raw and I don't want to say similar because obviously you're very different writers, but at the same time, you both really hit at the heart of things immediately, which is to do with the self and others, and those interrelationships, and how that mix ends up at the end.
Thank you for saying that. That is absolutely.
I don't know, but
no, what you are reaching for is and was a core theme and priority of this particular collection. Speaking of the tension between lyric and narrative, one of the ironic things, having just praised poetry for its lyric capacities, and saying that I write lyric poems, the irony there is that this book is also like very much a coming of age story. So it is in many respects a narrative of lyric poems, right? And part of that character movement that the speaker goes through is from solitude to connection, right? To connection romantically, connection communally, connection familially, right? Repairing those bridges outwards to other people, right? That was very much, insofar as the book has a character arc, that was sort of a core piece of it.
I love a poem that fractures things. I think a bad poem provides answers, and a good poem leaves you with more questions than you started. But they have to be interesting and ambiguous questions. I used to get on my students for the difference between ambiguity and vagueness, or and it's like one of them invites multiple rich interpretations, and there's so many interesting ways that you can take it, and it's formed by so many different perspectives, and the other one is just confusing. So we've all read both,
But when
I
you
think.
say fracturing, aren't you also talking about like associating and reassociating and reassociating?
Yeah, and remixing, like you were talking about earlier with that poem, I guess, form that you invented of like sampling. I love that you compared it to hip hop, because I'm a huge hip hop fan. But yeah, like fracturing the self and fracturing the other, the perceived. Yeah. I'm just going to talk myself in circles about identity, I guess.
Your poems are like having a dialogue with several people at once. You know that dolphins can have multiple conversations at the same time. Anyway, I was just suddenly thinking about that. It is true. But I think of that as our work as being kind of dialogues with the outside world and with ourselves, as you said. But it is that multiple, the polyvocal aspect of, exploration. And I think that the more we allow ourselves to risk, that was one of the great things my first professor taught me. So do you maybe have something that your favorite professors that, like, Thomas Luck said, if you're not risking something, you're not doing it right. So did you guys have an instigator?
Yeah, for me, I guess it's fitting that. So this book is my first published book, but not the first book that I wrote, right? And I had written an early manuscript of poems that went around and made finalists, but always a bridesmaid, never a bride, in a number of contests, right? And it was a book of persona poems, so very much outside of the self. And a mentor of mine essentially gave me the same advice, right? Which is that I think that you're using the persona, right, the character, the narrative, as a shield, right, between you and the audience, and the next step for you is to take the shield down. And so that's, I suppose, how we wound up with this book.
I like that a lot. I immediately thought back to when I was sequencing this stupid book. This was my master's thesis, and I was just beating my head against the wall. And it's so confessional, and a lot of the poems are about like one old relationship in particular that at the time had really was haunting me, and I was homesick for my friends, and I missed LA, and it was all this really personal, confessional stuff that I didn't want to become like solipsistic, to use the word you used earlier. And I remember I brought it to my thesis advisor. It was Jim Galvin. And I was like, I don't know if I can even publish this. This is talking about real people. I don't know how this is going to impact my life. I don't know how it's going to impact I've had poems written about me, and nobody ever reads good intentions into a poem written about them. It always comes off as like so scary and weird or invasive, and I'll never forget. He sat me down in his office. He's like, Jackson, because his voice, Jim Galvin, he's a cowboy. He was like, Jackson, your allegiance is to the work. It's not to the fans, it's not to the critics, it's not to yourself, it's to the work. Now let's get back to work. And I was like,
true.
It's so true. It's so easy to get caught up in that, like thinking about what's going to play well to people, or what's going to make people laugh or cry, or what the critics are going to like, or what's going to help you win a stupid contest or whatever. But if you, especially in nowadays with the commodification of poetry and like speaking of social media influencers and this pressure that we have to like self-promote and to, I don't know, it's easy to lose sight of that. But I try to think of that as my what's the minute, like Ariadne's thread, like back to basics is just your allegiance is to the work. So I just try to remember, I'm like, I just have to honor the poetry gods. Like, I don't give a fuck about all the rest of it on a good day.
Well, it makes me think too that something that Lucille Clifton said. She said, your fidelity is not to the facts; it's to the truth in the poem. And so, in that sense too, you might feel like you're talking about your relationships or your, but once it's in the page and once it's becoming like a material and artwork that you're working with, don't you feel like that there's still enough distance? Like it's, I don't know. And again, this was something several professors said. They said it no longer belongs to you once you've made it. And so for that reason, then it's good to stand back and pretend like someone else wrote it and say to yourself, well, what's happening, right? What's going on here? But I love this, and the reason I keep going back to process is I think as artists, we're interested in our own process, but we're interested in how, again, we problem solve this cool thing that we do. I completely abandoned everything that I wrote here but let me just see if there's anything else. Yes, state of mind, point of view. And I don't know, did you want to say anything else that's really on your mind? Did you want to ask a question? I always think that's there's something that we've sparked.
Yeah.
Might not be anymore.
This one's not on? Yeah. Okay, cool. So I've just been, all right, great. I've been looking at
I think it was working for a while.
I'm cheating.
Any questions from y'all? Hey.
What does it mean to be in conversation with another poet if you guys already know each other?
That's a really good question because we didn't know each other before this, and I was so relieved to realize that our work was so simpatico, because it's really awkward when you have to give a reading and your work is like one time I had to do a reading with this woman whose poems were like, I don't know if I should say that. She's probably not watching. It's just live streaming on YouTube, but I don't know. It was a series of poems that were really smart. Like, she was a lot smarter than I was, but they were like hexagonal. It was like bee poems, and they were exploring the world of bees, and it was like the syllables were all complicated system that she explained to me one time, and I am sure I'm butchering it, but it was really weird, me reading my like drunk ass like, oh, look at me, I'm Tom Waits poems next to her, like carefully, meticulously, and our appearances were real different too. I had like holes in my jeans and I smelled like smoke. I was all like crazy, and she was like together. So I was stoked when I realized that our shit was really like in conversation. It's like I think it's a lot easier to talk to somebody who's simpatico, because there are definitely camps of poets and like allegiances, and I think it's fun to like go back like head to head with somebody who's, Ars Poetica you really disagree with. But
yeah, and devil's advocate, I suppose, to that. I'm like a sucker for the awards season roundtables that all these actors do and upload to Instagram. And if anyone here has not seen the Coleman Domingo Kieran Culkin pairing for Vanity Fair, it's fucking wild, and you should go watch it, because two more dissimilar people on planet Earth do not exist. And it's incredible. They disagree about everything, every aspect of craft, of process, of product. but it's so illuminating, right? To confront how many different ways there are to do this and still do it interestingly and do it authentically, right? And so, this is not the first time that I've been in conversation here on Book Tour with someone who I had the pleasure of meeting the night of the event. But everyone is interesting. I think as long as you go into it open, right? Also willing to be honest, right? Honest when you disagree, honest when you agree. I think that the conversations rarely fail as long as both sides approach it from that perspective.
I'm sorry, but I think this also brings it back to what we were talking about at the beginning about, groups. And but when I was teaching children, I would say to them, well, if you tell me something is blue, I said, look around the room, look at all the different color versions of blue, and I'd say if the sky is blue, we all know that, we're all familiar with that, and then I thought Galway Connell once said, the more specific you become, the more personal you become, the more universal you will be. And I think there's a truth to that, even if it's like something we've never experienced. There's some element to the human experience, the human emotions, the human voice, and our compulsions, our drives. There's something that we share, even when we think we don't. Which is why they say, if you're creating a great villain in a screenplay, there has to be some element of a tiny element of empathy that we might have. With that, in those superhero films, there's always some love story or something so that we can, so can remember they're human. But I think I love the idea that we don't really know each other. I mean, I know Perry now, but I didn't when I first interviewed Perry. And there's something thrilling about that. It's because in those discoveries, and when you pick up a book for the first time, you're discovering something about that person. I think.
Yeah.
I feel.
I was reading a bunch of Primo Levi poems and like Holocaust stuff, and one of the things that really stood out to me was several people who survived Auschwitz and said something similar, where they said that the thing that carried them through was curiosity. Like, if you can approach things and even challenges, even like death and torture and the worst things with curiosity, with a sense of like, I wonder what happens next. I wonder what so feel. I wonder. Curiosity is a really powerful anesthetic toward, or like against anxiety and against other things. So I think about that a lot. I try to come into interactions with curiosity about the person, or I approach a new book with curiosity about the book, and just trying to approach things in good faith instead of, I'm such a hater. Like, I'm so judgmental about stuff, but I try to quiet that, and it seems to help sometimes.
Curiosity is a good definition for poetry.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. A pheasant disappearing in the bush, as Wallace Stevens said. There's just so many great quotes. You could find like dozens of quotes of what people think, but I think in that, and again in that way, that it shows that the necessity of it in the broad spectrum. This is not. It's not an academic pursuit per se, even though we studied it, right? Yeah. It's about the power of language that we share, hopefully. Trying to think if there's anything else that we... I just think it's a wonderful idea to buy the writer's books for yourself as a present, or for presents for future presents of the people that are having birthdays or whatever it is. And also, especially now, we want to support literature and books and Beyond Baroque. Beyond Baroque. It's amazing, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, Elena. That was great.